First, the phony feminist. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, the unofficial anthem of the women's liberation movement in the 1970s was an iconic Helen Reddy song.
I am strong. I am invincible. I am woman.
I am woman, hear me roar. Well, that really should capture the campaign of a supposed trailblazer like Kamala Harris. We were going to empower women, women who could take charge and, if necessary, take names. Now, the idea was that women would and should be in positions where they could be leaders in any field and not restrained by the men around them, if only they were given a fair shot. Now let's look at Kamala Harris. She's always tried to portray herself as a strong female force to be reckoned with.
Come on now. And what we know, always though, is knowing that we get out of bed every morning. And we get our hair done. And we do what is necessary.
The narrative was set early on, and the press dutifully fell in line. And now the push is in overdrive. Kamala, the savior of the abortion industry. And then there's a strong resume, of course. Attorney General, prosecutor, vice president, senator. Finally, a political leader that women could be proud of. But the facts tell a different story. First, she didn't earn this nomination on her own. It was handed to her. She didn't build the campaign organization that is now propping her up either. Nor did she develop any of her own positions. Any ideas she may have had back in California or in the Senate, those have just been jettisoned by consultants who know her and don't trust her to make the case for them. This supposed feminist powerhouse is not doing any of the things that voters expect a vice president to do, let alone a president. When you see that even her friends in the media are begging her, and I mean begging her not to delve into serious issues, well, she's being treated as a damsel in distress for sure. Of course, they're going to allow her to chit-chat with social media influencers about her taco recipes and maybe about her Spotify playlist, but that's about it.
First I chop up the bacon and get all that fat going. Then I put garlic, some chili peppers, and then a lot of water and a little chicken stock, and I let it go for a while before I put the greens in.
Everything else, the border, inflation, our military recruitment crisis, that's off limits for discussion. It will be handled by her staff. And they've made it very clear that they have no intention of putting her out there to defend her tax hikes, her federal spending spree, or her plans to cram down climate change mandates.
You're going to continue over the course of the next 8 or 9 weeks to see her talk a little bit more about what her vision is going to be in terms of policies that she's going to back when she becomes president.
No, I don't know what that is. I remember when Margaret Thatcher, though, became Prime Minister of Britain. She was the epitome of grace and strength. And her economic and foreign policy vision, that was clearly her own. She was brilliant and could debate serious policy with the best of them. And yeah, my generation expected that we would live in a world with a strong, powerful female leader and leaders across politics, business, academia, and medicine. And indeed, on The Angle, every week, we feature accomplished, bright, and articulate women. CEOs, senators, scholars, philanthropists. You've seen them all. There are people like Tulsi Gabbard, Kim Reynolds, Marsha Blackburn, people like Senator Katie Britt in Alabama. Who thinks that if any one of them were running for president, that they'd be hiding from the press and giggling about whether to put Tabasco on greens? Strong women are capable of being leaders, but she's being used by a powerful group of people to mask an unpopular and failing Democrat Party that voters, frankly, when they really look at the issues, despise. But she's not going to be allowed to make any real changes to the failing policies of the past few years. No way. She's not going to be allowed to pick any of her top cabinet officials. She won't be allowed to set our China policy. She will not be allowed to make decisions about the war in Ukraine. And I know tonight you're sitting there going, well, Laura, if she's not making those, who is going to make those decisions? Well, Who knows? But today there was a dweeby campaign guy on TV speaking about her economic plans.
We've got to go win an election, and the vice president's doing that by talking about her economic vision, and it's really different. It's really different.
It's really different. Okay, can you tell me what is really different?
She wants to take into effect the first national law to take on corporate price gouging.
Well, he's just a staffer, and a not very articulate one at that. The ones who will really make the big calls are the same people who got Biden to drop out of the race, the same people who gave her the nomination, the same people who told her to argue that the debate rules should be changed, the same people who decided she'll stop at one debate, no more. Those are the ones who will have the real power if she were to ever win the presidency. I think she'll even have less power than Biden when you really think about it. At least he had some people in there who were loyal to him, and he did have a lot of experience. All Kamala Harris is going to have is her radical sister and, I don't know, maybe her brother-in-law. She wants him to be attorney general, but I doubt they'll let her do that. Of course, the press will not dig into any of this. They're not interested. They're going to maintain a shocking but, I guess, really kind of predictable level of incuriosity about who exactly governs America. But the voters in November, they may have a different view. And women, all you women out there, you should want a real president who's directly responsible to you, who isn't merely a puppet for more powerful figures. How is that girl power? Forget Kamala, the tough prosecutor lady. She's more like an affable daytime talk show host. Should be a good panelist on The View. Unconsciously admitting that there is zero substance to Kamala Harris, Politico today billed the Harris Walls campaign as something like an 80s-style sitcom, even dubbing it the Kamala and Tim Show. Well, tonight, on behalf of the 1980s, if you remember Family Ties or The Cosby Show, the Tim and Kamala Show, it's not even close. They're more like, I don't know, the local market hosts of a kind of mildly fun and amusing morning show, maybe a Good Morning Berkeley, Good Morning Oakland, Good Morning Minneapolis. Today on this episode of Good Morning Berkeley, Tim and I will talk about the coolest homemade Halloween costumes for your kids. That kind of show. But this isn't what we expected of our first female vice president, certainly not what we expected for our first female president. We want strong, smart, and never afraid to answer a question. But her entire campaign, her entire premise for running is insulting to women. And that's The Angle.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.